It's 77 degrees out, sunny, and it's the 69th day of reading The Power Broker. Life could be a dream. Life is a dream. Um, and I'm doing awesome. I just got like a raspberry pastry from this very trendy bakery nearby called L'Appartement 4F, like in a French way. And then I walked through the Brooklyn Historical Society, which is sort of near me, but not near enough that I like have been before. And it was kind of disappointing, but also fun to see. The building was cool, but they didn't really let you look at the books unless you're like with a staff member. So that was disappointing. Anyway, I'm doing great. I just realized I brewed coffee, but I didn't grab it. So I'm gonna quick take you on a little field trip to the kitchen. I don't really have anything to say. Oh, but I'm wearing a little skirt today. Isn't this kind of cute? I feel like Cher from Clueless. If you know, you probably know Clueless. But yeah, I know. So I kind of work for myself right now. Like I'm just writing a book about Wikipedia all day, and so I definitely like could. Hello. It's just it's a fun movie that I watched when I was in high school. I know I work for myself and I like probably could just be outside all day, but I also cannot shake the obligation to work for like a lot of hours every day. So I'm not gonna let myself do that, but maybe I could. Also, hello. I forgot to get my coffee ready before I started, and it's brewing, and I really want it. So that's why there's a delay. Where in the world are you? I think you might have said before, but I forgot. It's because in New York, it's amazing weather. It's like, I don't know. I think it's 77 the last time, or that's what the high is supposed to be. And I walked along the little riverfront, and there were all these. I feel like of all the places I've been in New York, the riverfront, the Brooklyn Promenade is where I've seen the most wide range of ages consistently. Like there's always some people there who, sorry, but pardon me, but you just kind of watch them because you're like afraid they're gonna fall over. Like they're like really. It feels like it's the first time they've taken their walker out in maybe a while. And then there's always kids running around. I don't know. It feels multi-generational places feel nice. I bet Robert Moses would agree. Also, when I passed the playground, I passed a playground and I really was eyeing it to see if the bathroom building was as boring as Robert Caro made them sound. In the last chapter, he was talking about how they were like kind of mass producing playgrounds, and so they didn't really have the same personalized touches. And yeah, I don't know. I thought the bathroom looked architecturally fairly boring, but it's not something I would have ever been bothered by. Okay, sorry for the very long intro. Here we go. Page 490. Where in the Netherlands are you? That is so fun. I went for the first time 2 years ago, and I have like very distant family members there. And there's a town that has a similar last name because that's where people I used to live. People that's where my very old ancestors lives. Okay, I do not know. I'm Google Mapsing that. If you Google my last name, Rawarda, I think the first result is a Wikipedia link for a woman who owned a brothel in Amsterdam, Horhencha, or maybe her daughter. I forgot the daughter's name, but I'm related to them distantly. She's like my great aunt. Okay, I've never been to this area, but if I'm ever back, I'll go because it's because it's the Netherlands. It's probably just I've been to Utrecht, which is like that's I think the closest I've been to how do you even say it? You probably have a very throaty like Nijmegen, which we never do in English. Okay, anyway, yeah, I have been to Raward. It was very small and underwhelming, but it was fun. Oh, you have hills. Mostly I just liked the trains. Also, I liked how people were so good at English, and a lot of it was really it was very crazy. Everyone I talked to just spoke like perfect accentless English. I even tried to do Duolingo to learn like the basic hello, thank you, one coffee please, like one beer, where's the bathroom type words, and I don't think I ever used a single one. But yeah, anyway, it's hard learning Dutch. Oh, you're okay, you're not a native speaker. Yeah, everyone was yeah, isn't the I saw this thing on Twitter yesterday that the 2 articles are, I forgot the 2 articles, but on Duolingo, if you write HET, it'll it'll mark it correct no matter what you said because that's pretty similar to both the articles. I forgot what the articles were, but it was kind of like writing like if you write like false in on a true false question to try to get it right either way. Oh, D and het. Oh, it was if you wrote det, DET, then Duolingo marked it right. Anyway, I don't speak German or Dutch. Also, I've been blabbing so long. I'm so sorry if you were here for the power broker. These reformers. Oh, we were talking about how slum dwellers were mad about something. Let's see. Okay, so Robert Moses was like, I don't want to make parks if they're small. What's the point? That's so small. But it's a problem because in some slum areas there was no park development after 1935, and the area was the lack of parks was particularly marked in Harlem and in the South Jamaica and Stuyvesant Heights tenement districts in Queens and Brooklyn. Okay, so then there are protests because he was like, no, I don't want to make parks in slums that are small. Okay, so then there's protests. These reformers were in the main those associated with settlement houses. Stanley Isaacs, president of United Neighborhood Houses, was notable among them. Working in the slums, they knew the needs of their people, and they knew that those people, forced to depend for beauty and recreation on what they could find in their neighborhoods, were particularly desperate for precisely those things that parks provided. Trees, a small plot of grass, a few flowers, anything that would provide a contrast to the concrete and red brick that surrounded the slums people with bleakness, that trapped them in stone. These people hungered for them. One had to do no more than walk along a block of tenements and look up and suddenly notice that fire escapes and windowsills were sprouting rusty cans filled with vines and flowers to realize that, as one observer was to put it, the poor have every bit as much interest in green growing things as the well-to-do, in open space or natural beauty. Groundbreaking. Poor people like plants. Mothers and fathers in the slums hungered for play space for their children. They couldn't afford to send the children to summer camps. They couldn't afford to take them on weekend or vacation trips. Because they didn't have cars, they couldn't take them to the parks Robert Moses had built on Long Island, because they seldom left the slums. They were only vaguely aware that there were large parks in other sections of the city which the children could reach by subway. Children who went to these parks often returned to say that the white people there had made them feel unwelcome, or that gangs of white teenagers had chased them away, and they did not go again. Any playing that the children of the slums did would have to be done in the slums. Kids have to play. That is what being a kid is. And if there were no parks in the slums for them to play in, they would have to play in the streets. If there were no jungle gyms, they would have to swing on rusty fire escapes. Ugh. If there were no indoor playhouses in which they could play on rainy days, they would have to find shelter somewhere else. And that meant deserted or burnt out tenements, the lair of the winos and the junkies and the perverts. Hi, Pearl. The idea of swinging from rusty fire escapes really gave me a flashback to the movie based on the musical Newsies. Also, another Dutch thing I just remembered, this is a total aside, sorry, I'm really just in tangent city today. I used to work at a nursing home, and there was this one woman with dementia who was, like, really old, like, in her maybe late 90s, I'm guessing she was 98, and, she was born in the Netherlands, and she had this very, like she had this, like, ruggedness about her, and some people were scared of her because she was very particular about you would have to help her go to the bathroom and help her get into bed and stuff, and she was really particular about pretty much everything, but I really liked her, and even though she had forgotten a lot of things about just daily life, she was pretty good at remembering Dutch, and so then sometimes she would teach me little phrases, and I do remember she would always, like, laugh and clap and be like, "Oh," whenever I would left, I would say, like, "Tot ziens," which I think is "see you later" or something. Anyway, it was very cute. I just totally forgot about her. She died a really long time ago, but she was great. I forgot her name. Eid? I think it was Eid. Ina? I don't know. Okay, anyway, and parks meant more in the slums than even beauty or play space. They had other values more intangible but also more important. They were assigned to the urban poor, the reformer said, that society cared for them, that the city in which they had been trampled so brutally low was holding out a hand to help them to their feet. In a way, they were a symbol of what Alfred E. Smith, who had understood the urban poor because he was one of them, had been talking about when, fighting for widows' pensions, he had stood in the well of the assembly chamber, a trumpet in his voice, and asked the legislators to consider the penniless widow whose children were taken away from her. What must be her feelings? What must be her idea of the state's policy? What can be the feelings in the hearts of the children themselves when they must, in after years, learn to know what the state's policy was with respect to their unfortunate condition? What new policy does this bill inaugurate? The state of New York reaches out to them. We recognize in you a resource of the state, and we propose to take care of you, not as a matter of charity, but as a government and public duty. If the city didn't provide, okay, so that was the end of the quote from Al Smith. If the city didn't provide parks, the reformers understood that was a sign that society didn't care. The people who lived in the slums might not verbalize that concept, but they would feel it, even if they didn't put it into words. And therefore, the lack of parks could only increase their bitterness toward society. The last intangible was even more important in terms of Blacks, whose influx into New York was beginning to assume the proportions of the previous Jewish, Irish, and Italian waves of immigration. Is it like the Great Migration? It must have been. There had been only 60,000 Blacks in the city in 1900, but there were 327,706 in 1930. That's really, and by 1940 there would be 458,000. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know it was like so that's crazy that in 40 years it it got like 9 times bigger. I guess the city itself pretty much doubled in that time. The population just like was ballooning in the 20s and 30s, but that's really crazy. Okay, anyway, the society from which they were alienated was the one that kept the Black man confined so low on the economic ladder that in 1939, half of all Black wage earners in New York were receiving less than $850 per year. I'm okay, 1930 was $850. Oops, in 1939. That is the equivalent of $19,000 today. That's crazy. So half of all people. Okay. It was the society that forced Black women to line up every morning in the quote slave market in the East 160s in the Bronx, so that white housewives could bid for their services. The pay was between 10 and 15 cents an hour with the cost of lunch deducted. This is so wow. The lining up, that's really crazy. It was the society that made sure that Blacks would have to work for such slave wages by closing to them its trade unions, thus adding to their handicap in competing with white men for better jobs, and by denying them the capital necessary to go into business for themselves. There was not a single bank in Harlem north of 125th Street. And that's like, I'm underlining that. And as for that embodiment of society that was government, the city government that was supposed to represent them as well as the white man, the attitude of that government was symbolized by public works. When LaGuardia came to office in 1934, there hadn't been a new school built in Harlem in 25 years. Okay, so if the population had I don't know, multiplied by 5 in that time, where were they going to school? LaGuardia's administration didn't get around to building one for 4 more years. And in all Harlem, the city provided to serve 300,000 people exactly one clinic, built with WPA funds in 1937, equipped with substantial facilities for childcare, and exactly one hospital, on whose executive staff there was exactly one Black staff member. Mothers and their babies died in Harlem at a rate more than double that in the city as a whole. More than 1 out of every 10 babies born in Harlem died at birth. Isaacs and the other reformers saw that the swelling Black population was not being assimilated into the city. Such assimilation was necessary, they said, if the influx continued and there was no base, no solid community that was part of the larger society around it, on which it could build. What would happen? The question of what will happen to the Black man in New York is overlaid with shadows of tragic premonition, one wrote. Isaacs and others begged the city to make an intensified effort to meet the needs of these new immigrants. The people needed help, they said, and the city must give it to them. It was a civic duty to do so, they said. It was a matter of conscience. And if you weren't interested in duty or conscience, well, it was a matter of expediency too. For neglecting Harlem's needs in the future, as they had been neglected in the past, could only lead to havoc in the city. Knowing how important small parks were to the city's poor, the reformers could hardly believe the implications of Moses's policies when they began to discern them. By banning public transportation, did he actually ban it, or was he just, I don't know. By banning public transportation, he had barred the poor from the state parks. Oh, from the state parks. I see. Yeah, are there trains to Long Island parks now? I don't know. In the same way, he was barring the poor from the best of the city parks, the big parks on the city's outskirts, such as Jacob Riis and Alley Pond. And now he was saying that he would not provide the poor with even small parks. He was pouring tens of millions of dollars into creating new parks in New York, but he was creating almost none for the people who needed parks most. The philosophy that parks were only for the comfortable middle class had been outdated for at least 10 years. Outdated is so funny because it's almost like I know he doesn't mean this, but it's like he's saying starting in 1925, poor people needed to hang out outside. Before that, they didn't. But they began to see that was the philosophy Moses was following. The reformers were still influential in the city, although they were becoming less so as LaGuardia gathered power onto himself. And unlike other Moses opponents, the reformers realized they received a hearing for their views from the city's press. Good government organization resolutions calling for small parks in the slums were at least printed, even if primarily on inside pages. But Moses simply shouted the reformers down. He replied, in replies that received better newspaper play than the statements he was replying to, that he was giving the slums parks, great parks. What, he demanded, was the great recreational complex he was building on Randall's Island, the great recreational complex he was building in Riverside Park. They were easily accessible to Harlem. As for small parks within the slums themselves, his experience, he said, had taught him that they were just too expensive to be considered. 3 acres, he said, was the smallest area that could be controlled and managed as a park. And since 3 acres is 130,680 square feet, and land bearing profitable slum tenements was going in the 1930s for about $30 per square foot, and a single park would thus cost the city about $4 million for land acquisition costs alone, and since as many as 2,500 people might be displaced by the raising of the tenements involved and would have to be relocated, This was an unanswerable argument, if you accepted it. Oh wow, it's so humid out that I like my cup is very wet. Many reformers, far more than had ever disagreed with Moses before, did not accept it. A park did not have to be 3 acres to help a slum, they said. It could be the smallest crevice in the grim wall of tenements, even a space the size of a single 100-foot by 20-foot building lot, or smaller, could be planted with grass and a few trees, or if equipped with a few benches, mean so much to the people of the block on which it was located. Something doesn't have to be big to brighten something that is drab, to bring pride to a place without any pride. Because they have nothing else to do, the people of the slums spend a lot of time looking out their windows. If there were a small park, even a tiny park, in the neighborhood, there would be a pleasant little scene to look at, something affirmative. Even if there was no grass in the park, there could be a few benches. And all at once, the neighborhood would have a better place to rest than the fenders of parked cars. A Vest Pocket Park could be an elegant little plaza. It could also just be a place for a kid to play or the elderly to relax, or for a pregnant mother to sit down for a minute on a walk home from the grocery store that suddenly seemed longer than it ever had been before. That feels like something like Robert Caro's wife said one time, like, "Wow, I'm pregnant and this walk home feels longer than ever before." The reformers, experts in parks, knew there were good small parks in other cities. They knew that Moses' argument was wrong. Furthermore, these reformers said Randall's Island and Riverside Park were not easily accessible to the slums. The Triborough Bridge would make the island accessible by car, but the people of the slums didn't have cars. There would, by Moses' edict, be no bus service to the island. The only way to get there would be to walk from the nearest point in Harlem or the South Bronx, a good 3/4 of a mile. Then there's a little asterisk. Distance figured from the point in Harlem at which a pedestrian would mount the Triborough Bridge pedestrian walk to the nearest park facility on Randall's Island. The Ward's Island pedestrian footbridge would not be built for another 20 years. I've never been to Ward's Island. I don't really know very much. Have I been to Randall's Island? I don't know. Mount Moore, okay, that's a different one. And that was from the nearest point of the slums, the edge of the river. From most of the slums, you would have to walk much farther. From the center of Harlem, then 145th Street, say more than 2 miles. Riverside Park, along the Hudson River, was a hike up a long, achingly steep hill from the nearest point in Harlem. People didn't want to hike long distances to parks. They wanted recreational facilities close at hand so that every trip to sit under a tree or shoot some baskets didn't have to be an expedition. The people of the slums wouldn't use these parks, they said. Morningside, St. Nicholas, and Colonial Parks, the 3 parks which formed the western border of Harlem, were fine, they said. But there was no other park between them and the East River. In the entire 3 square miles of Harlem, an area which contained 300,000 people, there wasn't a single patch of green. Okay, Mount Morris Park. There's a footnote. So there's no single patch of green, apparently. Mount Morris Park, between 120th and 124th Streets, would become part of the black slums of Harlem later, when the slums expanded south. In the mid-1930s, their southern border was still 125th Street. But while newspapers printed the reformers' resolutions, they did not support them editorially. And the reform front on the issue was not solid. The prestigious Park Association of New York City was dominated by elderly park fighters who clung to the old view of parks, its insistence that Central Park be kept for passive contemplation was the proof of the way it really felt. And while its president, Mrs. Sulzberger, was more liberal on the point than many of her colleagues, Mrs. Sulzberger was not criticizing Robert Moses. And Moses was not listening to criticism anyway. When an alderman, we're almost done with this chapter, by the way, only like one more page. When an alderman from Harlem wrote to Moses appealing for more playgrounds, Moses replied that he was, of course, in entire sympathy with what you have in mind, but that the sites you suggest are too expensive. We shall provide one playground in Harlem. When the alderman ventured to write him again on the subject, Moses declined to continue the correspondence. In 1930, Moses, as head of the Metropolitan Park Conference, had led the fight to persuade the city to preserve parts of its fast disappearing woodland in Queens and Staten Island by purchasing huge tracts for parkland. Reformers had cheered him for that accomplishment. It had preserved open space, beautiful wooded open space for the city forever. But now Moses was filling that space with baseball diamonds and football fields and tennis courts, and the land for them could be cleared only by cutting down trees. And Moses was filling other parks with playgrounds and stadia. I don't read the plural of stadium very often. And he's filling them with handball courts and parking fields. Throughout the city's park system, the reformers suddenly realized grass was giving way to concrete. The reformers knew that grass had to be supplanted by recreational facilities and parking lots in many of the city's parks, but not, they were sure, in all of the city's parks. But Moses' plans for parks did not include keeping them, any of them, in their natural state. His plans were not limited to repairing the ravages made in them by Tammany Park commissioners so as to restore them to their natural state. His plans were to cram all of them, with bathhouses and tennis houses, baseball diamonds and tennis courts, restaurants and bicycle paths, zoos, and asphalted playgrounds with ugly black iron fences around them. This is the second time Robert Caro has trashed the fences around the playgrounds, which I noticed today as I walked past the playground, and it did not really bother me. Maybe I've just gotten too used to it. Maybe if I were born 100 years ago, I would have higher standards for my playground fences. Concrete instead of precious grass. It took a while for the reformers to realize what Moses was doing. First, because he kept his plans so secret that it was difficult for them to discern the overall pattern beneath them until they had begun unfolding. Second, because they had been so thoroughly convinced that he was a fighter for parks that they did not easily accept the realization that his definition of parks was much narrower than theirs, and perhaps not at all compatible with it. That where they saw in a towering stand of oak and elms and white pine a priceless bounty to a beauty-starved city, Moses saw a baseball diamond. Many of them, in fact, never came during the 1930s to realize this, because they never took the time to study his overall park plans, and while they were distressed by what he was doing to a particular park in which they were interested, they accepted his assurances that he was preserving nature in the rest of the park system. I think they just think parks are they're like, like conservation, like the whole like national park thing where it's just like take nature as it is. I think they just want people to be in the woods. But then there was that one lady, Mrs. Sulzberger, who was her dad was the owner of the New York Times, and she played a role at the New York Times too. And she was talking about how she was really mad when he was going to put playgrounds in Central Park because he was like, no one should have to deal with kids in the park. Yeah, and then yesterday there were a bunch of drunk people in parks, and one of the most memorable scenes from yesterday was when he talked about how sometimes in the morning kids would climb into like one of the tube structures in the playgrounds, and then they would find a drunk guy in there, which is like such nightmare material. Also, where is that? Like, what's the citation there? Like, did that happen once and get written up in the newspaper, or was that like, a core memory that happened to everyone? I'm very curious. It was in the 1930s. I'm guessing it was like pretty much everything we've been talking about in this chapter is like 1935 to 1939, like when he's getting a ton of money from the New Deal. But yeah, World War II definitely has not happened yet. Okay, let's see. But some of the reformers did come to realize the implications of Moses' park philosophy rather quickly, and were anxious to discuss it with him. They were anxious that room be found in the park system, which, after all, was a huge one, and included thousands of acres of still undeveloped woods and fields and streams, for their values as well as his. They were sure that in a discussion they would have no difficulty explaining to him, for they all agreed he was brilliant, the most brilliant public servant, many of them said, that they had ever met, the crucial difference which apparently he had not yet grasped between the implications of his philosophy when applied to Long Island parks and parks within the city. On no point, in fact, were they more anxious for discussion. For the destruction of the natural values of a park was not a remedial mistake. It was one that could never be rectified. Destroy the delicate natural balance of a marshland to make a concrete lined lagoon, and it did not lie within the power of man to restore that balance. Wow, that feels like if you told me that was a quote, an ancient quote from like, I don't know, somewhere where they had lagoons, not Shakespeare, but one of the old British guys, I would be like, yeah, that sounds right. Anyway, before any changes were made in the parks, therefore, there must be sufficient discussion to ensure that the changes made were the right ones. But Moses no longer had to discuss. He had long had great dreams for the city, and now he had learned how to make dreams come true. He had learned the technique of stake driving and of whipsawing. He had learned how to mislead and conceal and deceive, how to lie to men and bully them, how to ruin their reputations. And he used all these methods to bring the dream to reality. And then, okay, this is like very interesting formatting. And then we have a massive break, and it says, or was it all for the dream? Wow. Okay, wow, exciting times. Day 69 is really just amazing. Next, we're on section 5, the love of power, and I kind of feel like I have to start it. Okay, chapter 25, changing. The last 500 pages have been a dream. That would be so funny if he was like, good morning, Robert Moses just woke up from his nap. He is 16 years old. Okay. Because of the arrogance that was so basic to his nature and to his mother's and grandmother's, Moses' susceptibility to the addiction of power was unusually strong. After he was given substantial power of his own by his appointment in 1924 to the presidency of the Long Island State Park Commission, the doses available to him were massive, but they did not satisfy him, as was noted by Judge Clearwater and Ansley Wilcox, who, charting his symptoms, observed a sense of dominating authority and a desire to have his own way in all matters large and small. If you're like just coming in, this is really like kind of basically so far this paragraph was like essentially a recap of the entire book. We kind of hit the major players: his mom, his grandma, who he loves, the like sort of rich guys who got mad at him for just, recklessly making highways through Long Island. Anyway, once Robert Moses had sought power only for the sake of his dreams, only as a means to an end. Even then, however, there were signs that he was beginning to seek it for its own sake as an end in itself. And the avidity with which he sought power and the length to which he went to get it revealed the depth of his need for it. The need was strong, and it was growing, and now it had been growing for 10 years. Power is being able to laugh at people who oppose you and to laugh at them with impunity, to antagonize them without fear of reprisal. Now Robert Moses seems to be going out of his way to laugh at people. The community councils of the city of New York Incorporated and their executive secretary, Minister Frank P. Beale, were disturbed by his plan to raise a reproduction of George Washington's Mount Vernon in Prospect Park. Why would they make a reproduction of Mount Vernon in Prospect Park, first of all? Mount Vernon's not that far away, is it? I feel like I should know this, but where's Mount Vernon? I definitely went, okay, oh wait, shoot, I always get confused because there's a Mount Vernon, which is like a very tony town, that's a suburb of New York, but I'm pretty sure that the George Washington Mount Vernon it's right outside of Washington, D.C., in Mount Vernon, Virginia. I've been there when I was a little kid. I don't really have very many memories. This is so dumb, but we went when I was probably like in 9th grade or maybe 8th grade, and I must have been in 9th grade because I had a phone. And I remember it was like really pretty and I was learning a lot and I kind of liked it, and that I got a text from the guy I had a crush on while I was there. And it's so dumb that like my stupid like 13-year-old girl brain, like that's my biggest takeaway from the home of the first president, but that was it. Another thing I remembered is that when, I'm not even kidding you about this one really just like lodged in my mind. When George, okay, I remember also they ate 2 meals a day at 7 a.m. and like maybe 3 p.m. And I remember those times seemed weird to me because I just was like, wouldn't you get hungry in between them? Like you would really have to fill up. The other thing I remember is that when George Washington died, I'm like 90% this is George Washington. They laid his body in like the common area of the house for a really long time. I think like, I don't know. I just remember it was so long that I was just certain that it must have stunk so bad in there. And it really disturbed me as a child. And then I forgot pretty much everything else. Oh, and then I think I remember that he had slaves and it was like, oh, like they were the Mount Vernon was kind of, I think that they had like added a bunch of stuff to be like, okay, also, by the way, he had a bunch of slaves and it was bad. His teeth. I don't really recall the teeth. It's so funny the things that you remember from like when you go to important things as a kid, because yeah, I remember when I toured the like John Adams's house, I just remember that my tour guide seemed pretty and had a cool nail polish color, because as a kid who was like, I don't know how old I was then, probably like 10, that just was like, I was like, oh, I want to be like her. Maybe I should read about George Washington. I feel like I don't know enough about him. There's a biography of him that came out somewhat recently by a woman named Alexis Coe, and it seems like it's like a little goofy and funny. One time I like paged through it when I was at a bookstore, and it had a little chart, and yeah, it seems cheeky, and it seemed like it really, like she didn't seem like she was like super reverent, which is nice. I don't know, a biography that like loves the subject too much is a little fishy, and she definitely was not like that. So maybe I'll read it later. Okay, anyway, I'm really like blabbing today. They said he was 6 feet tall. Yeah, I don't know. I've never met him. Because of the arrogance. Okay, wait, whoops, we read all of that. Okay, sorry. That was because they're raising a reproduction of Mount Vernon that was built in Prospect Park. I wonder if this was like part of the bicentennial of George Washington's birth, which is the same reason why they made, I'm pretty sure, a copy of like some George Washington building in Bryant Park. Do you remember that? Remember that disaster? Okay, they were not pressing the point particularly hard or attempting to make a large public issue of it. The councils had no power. Moses could easily have ignored them and simply have gone ahead with the work. Instead, he gave the opposition publicly, calling in reporters to tell them about it, apparently for no other reason than to be able to also tell them that work is going ahead in spite of the community council, and so that he could deliver himself a remark that he wanted to make and have published. He set up the remark by saying, "It's a strange thing, but nothing has been heard from any responsible person on the community council." A reporter asked, as Moses had undoubtedly expected a reporter to ask, "What about Mr. Beale?" And Moses could thereupon say, "That's what I mean." On other occasions, he similarly volunteered information about opposition only so that he could loftily dismiss it. Once he volunteered, unsolicited, the information that a group of distinguished architects had presented him with a plan for reconstruction of Bryant Park, apparently just so that he could add, with a smile, "Such a plan is not to be carried out." I think I'm going to read like 2 more paragraphs here. He seemed to be going out of his way to antagonize people. He could have simply ignored William Exton and Robert Weinberg when they began proposing changes in his West Side Improvement Plan. The two young reformers had no chance in making him even consider the changes. But he agreed to the interview with Exton, and Exton recalls that when he arrived at Moses's office, he said, "Well, as City Park Commissioner, maybe I can see you have a case, but the State Park Commission says so-and-so, and the authority says so-and-so." Well, he was the State Park Commission, and he was the authority, and I knew it, and he knew I knew it. It wasn't particularly subtle. It was just thumbing his nose at you. And Exton says, he had the feeling that Moses had given him the interview just so he could have the pleasure of the thumbing it. Once he apparently went all the way to the Rockaways just to antagonize a local civic association, which had invited him to speak because they were concerned about the effect his proposed Marine Parkway Bridge might have on Floyd Bennett Field, the airport that was the Rockaways' pride. Does that still exist? I'm looking it up. Floyd Bennett Field? Oh, it's a historical place. I don't know if there's a Wikipedia page. Let's see. It doesn't really seem like it's still operational, but I don't really want to read all of this, so. Okay, anyway. Moses could have declined the invitation. He seldom spoke before civic groups, but he accepted and made the long trip across Jamaica Bay, mounted the stage, and informed the audience, "That airport of yours isn't so hot. It never should have been built in the first place." And then, as the Times reported, he smacked his hand down and glanced up at the ceiling to indicate that he was through discussing the topic. Okay, wait, hold on. "That airport of yours isn't so hot. It should have never been born in the first place." I don't really do that gesture very much in my life. I kind of had to test it out. If Moses had any motive for the trip to enlighten the audience, educate them, persuade them, convince them, conciliate them, listen to them, or answer their questions, other than his enjoyment at insulting them and showing them that he could thumb his nose in their faces and there was nothing they could do about it, that motive eluded the audience. Power is being able to ruin people, to ruin their careers and their reputations and their personal relationships. Moses had this power, and he seemed to use it even when there was no need to, going out of his way to use it so that it is difficult to escape the conclusion that he enjoyed using it. He may have felt it was necessary to turn the power of his vituperation on men whom he felt posed a threat to his dreams, but he turned it also on individuals who posed no such threat. Pearl Bernstein, for example. Oh my gosh, Pearl, that's the name of my cat. Well, not Bernstein. That would be crazy. Pearl, this is you. I'm gonna grab her. Do you guys like my skirt? I feel like Cher from Clueless today. Pearl Bernstein, for example, was a young Barnard College graduate whom LaGuardia, for some inexplicable reason, had appointed secretary to the Board of Estimate. Quote, "She was a naive girl, and the job was utterly beyond her," Kern recalls. "It was common knowledge that she made no decisions on her own, but simply carried out LaGuardia's orders, relayed through Kern." Okay, I'm pausing. All the women in this book are like either they're like the wives who we never hear about, or they're secretaries who are idiots and cry all the time, or they're Frances Perkins, who's the only good one. It's really crazy. Like, usually I don't notice this. Like, I'm not someone who has a natural radar for the Bechdel test, but it's really crazy. Okay, I'm not, maybe Pearl Bernstein really was like totally unqualified. But anyway, Moses must have known this. But when, in 1934, LaGuardia, infuriated by the park commissioner's cooperation with Democratic members of the board, issued an order that no matter was to be placed on its calendar at the instance of any commissioner until he had personally approved it, and Miss Bernstein, who was in charge of the calendar, therefore refused to place on it some of Moses's unapproved requests, Moses attacked her. writing Kern a letter with copies sent simultaneously to Miss Bernstein's associates and to officials throughout City Hall, attacking her amateurishness, delay, and pettiness, and complete absence of willingness to cooperate with people who are trying to get something accomplished. Okay, I want to finish this Pearl Bernstein arc. Kern, who was at this point still a Moses fanatic, because later he gets screwed over because he's the one that Moses says is a communist, even though he kind of wasn't. Okay, but Kern, still a Moses fanatic, was startled because he knew that the mayor, not Miss Bernstein, was the source of the order. Kern had, in fact, heard Moses arguing with LaGuardia about it. Just in case the park commissioner had forgotten, Kern reminded him of this fact. But to his surprise, the attacks continued, escalating in viciousness. One also circulated throughout City Hall, referred to the order as one of casting swine before Pearl. I should be glad to have a standing order at any slaughterhouse, but these are really important construction matters with which she is interfering. Kern began to realize, reluctantly, that his idol, angry at the order and unwilling to argue further with its originator, had decided to vent his spleen on Miss Bernstein instead. Apparently for no other reason than that she was handy and too small to fight back. I need to start saying vent my spleen when I'm laying something on someone. Moses' attacks, Kern was to conclude, were an example of his irresponsible brutality, a wantonness almost, a sadistic joy in hurting other people, as well of his willingness to beat little people on occasions when he was reluctant to go to the mat with the big people, like the mayor. The number of defenseless minor officials on whom Moses unleashed his vituperation was legion. The officials least able to fight back were those on his own staff, and to those he was, if possible, even more viciously abusive. Once, when one of his aides at a luncheon meeting attended by a dozen men ventured to offer a suggestion which hadn't been cleared with Moses first, Moses whirled on him and said, "Now you're just a swabby on this ship. Do you understand?" I'm assuming I don't know, I've never heard swabby, but I'm assuming it's swab the deck type person. And while the others present squirmed in embarrassment for the man being humiliated, Moses repeated to him, "Do you understand? Do you understand?" refusing to be satisfied with a nod, making the aide say out loud, "Yes, sir." And the bullying was not just verbal. City Hall was whispering about Moses' physical encounters with other men. Fight. Okay, fight. The 200-pound park commissioner had at least 2 such encounters during his governmental career prior to entering the city administration. As in the case of scrawny little Slat Johnson, the roommate he knocked down at Yale, neither of them was his physical equal. Raymond Torrey, whom he tried to strangle at the State Council of Parks meeting, and at whom he then hurled a heavy smoking stand, was a pudgy little bird watcher. That's so, how could you strangle him? How could you strangle a pudgy little bird watcher? Moses had also staged a fist fight with WPA Administrator Hugh Johnson in Bernard Barrack's apartment. We'd never heard about this, I'm pretty sure. And Johnson, at the time, was 52, 8 years older than Moses, and exceedingly drunk. Now, Moses had additional physical encounters, and the pattern continued. This was at the opening of a section of the West Side Highway, Joseph Ingraham of the Times recalls. It was raining, and we had to go into some kind of tent. Some little old character, just a minor functionary in government, was there, and Moses said to me, "Wait till you see what I do to this guy." He went over and grabbed him and almost literally picked him up by the scruff of his neck and shook him. It was very embarrassing. I said, "What did he do?" He said, "He hasn't done anything yet, but I just wanted to head him off." This is so like, this reminds me of like Goodfellas behavior. Other City Hall observers recall other Moses fistfights but not one with a man to whom he had a chance of losing. I keep saying I'm almost done, but I'm actually going to be almost done reading. Once in an executive session of the Board of Estimate, Moses presented the board with a proposal for a project whose cost, he promised, would be borne almost entirely by the federal government and would cost the city practically nothing. He presented the board with a set of extremely detailed facts to prove his point. Most of the members of the board were thinking the same thing, one of them recalls, but only Stanley Isaacs had the courage to give the thoughts voice. He said mildly, "When Mr. Moses says something will cost 3.4%, he adds the 0.4 only to make you think it's accurate. It's really 6.2%. Moses' response was to take a violent swing with his fist in Isaac's direction and say, "I'd like to punch you in the nose." He wasn't close enough to hit him with the baseball bat, says Isaac's Borough Works Commissioner Walter D. Binger. Walter D. Binger. It was just a motion of passion. Yeah, this is just my motion of passion. But Moses was tall and athletic, and the mild-mannered Isaacs was 57 years old. Everyone in the room was shocked, Binger says. I'm going to stop there. I hope that if it's really nice where you are, like it is here, I hope you get to go outside or something. Thanks for joining. Sorry again about, I don't know, I think I might have set a record for most pointless, meandering, just like blabbing. Also, the honking is crazy. What's going on? Whew. That's all from me. Have a good day. Oh my gosh, hi Hajin, I just finished. Yeah, this chapter was good. First, we talked about how Moses was really racist. Well, he didn't say the word racist, but like he just didn't build any parks in neighborhoods where there were Black people. And I didn't really realize how much the Great Migration, like how many people that really was. Like the Black population, I think it multiplied by 9 between 1900 and 1940, something like that. It was like a huge, it went from 60,000 to 400 something thousand. Kind of crazy. Anyway, and then the rest was pretty much just about normal stuff. Goodbye. Walter D. Googler's evil twin. Oh, I see. Walter D. Binger. Walter D. Yahooer. Aw, bye. I love you too, Hajin. Look at Pearl's like really, the weather's really nice, and I think she's been acting crazy. Bye.